It was a normal night, like so many others, coming back down Archer Avenue after a delivery in Chicago. The stretch near Resurrection Cemetery has always made me feel a little uneasy, I don't know why. There's something about that road, maybe the way the trees bend over the asphalt, or the heavy silence of the place, that makes you want to speed up. But that night, I was relaxed, listening to low music, windows closed against the cold. When I saw someone on the side of the road, I reflexively lifted my foot off the accelerator. It was a young woman, alone, dressed in white, looking a little lost. She waved slightly, almost shyly. I slowed down, stopped the truck, and rolled down the passenger window. I asked her if she was okay. She only replied, "Can I walk you to the gate?" Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper, but firm. I didn't think much about it. I unlocked the door, and she climbed in. She sat down next to me without saying anything else. The smell of flowers filled the cabin, but it was an old perfume, like the kind your grandmother smells like, you know? Strangely comforting. I glanced at her, very white skin, blonde hair tied up in a retro style, clothes that looked old. But I didn't question it. I figured it was just her style. I wasn't sure whether to start a conversation, so I asked her if she lived nearby. She just said, "I've been here before." And then there was silence. I kept driving, my headlights illuminating the empty road ahead. Her presence was different. It wasn't scary, but there was something odd about it, as if she were out of place there. As if she didn't belong there. As we approached the cemetery's main gate, she looked ahead and said, "This is it." I slowed down, waiting for her to open the door. But then came the shock. When I parked and looked to the side, the seat was empty. I didn't hear the door open, I didn't feel any movement. She simply disappeared. Her perfume still hung in the air, fainter, but present. I stood there, silent, not knowing what to do. I thought maybe she had left so quickly that I hadn't even noticed. But then I looked at the seat. On the carefully placed seat there was an old, golden brooch, in the shape of a rose. As if it had been left there on purpose. As if it were a message. I picked up the brooch carefully, not sure if I should touch it. It was heavy, well-crafted, and clearly old. It had a curious detail. The initials, MC, were delicately engraved on the back of it. I put it on the dashboard console and got out of the truck, looking around. The road was empty, with no sign of anyone. I went to the cemetery gate, but it was locked with a chain. A thin mist was beginning to form on the ground, as if the cold had only intensified there. There was no noise from cars or wind. It was as if that stretch of road was isolated from the rest of the world. I went back to the cabin, still confused, but decided to continue the trip. I didn't tell anyone that night. I just kept mulling it over in my head, trying to find a logical explanation. The next day, I stopped at a coffee shop and ended up telling a lady who was working at the counter. When I told her where it had happened, she stopped cleaning her cup and looked at me differently. She asked if the woman was wearing a light-colored dress and had her hair tied up. I nodded, and she simply said, "You found Mary." I didn't understand at first, and she told me that for decades drivers have reported giving rides to a young woman with those same characteristics, always near Resurrection Cemetery. And that she always disappears when she gets to the gate. I researched this later. And the story fits. It even has a name, Resurrection Mary. Some say she was run over and killed on that road a long time ago, after leaving a dance. Others say she was buried alive by mistake. No one knows for sure, but everyone in the area has heard of her. The strangest thing is that some drivers report having kept objects of hers, scarves, brooches, even a shoe. And what gave me the creeps the most, an old photo I saw in one of the articles showed a young woman identical to the one who got into my truck. Same face. Same hairstyle. Same light-colored dress. I drove past that stretch again a few weeks later. I avoided looking too much to the side, keeping my eyes on the road. But as I got closer to the gate, the truck's radio turned on by itself, and played an old-timey, 1940s dancehall song. I froze. No one had touched the button. The song played for exactly 15 seconds, and then stopped. No static, no hiss. Just silence. And the scent of flowers returned for a moment. Intense. As quickly as it had come, it was gone. Ever since then, I've kept the brooch with me. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Because I think that, somehow, she just wanted to be remembered. And now, I remember. One time, I thought about leaving the brooch back at the cemetery gate, as a way of giving back. I arrived there on a cloudy morning, with no traffic. I left the truck parked on the shoulder and walked to the gate with it in my hand. But when I got closer, a strange thing happened. The brooch fell out of my hand by itself, as if it had slipped, and rolled until it stopped against the iron fence. I tried to pick it up, but my hand started to tingle, and I felt a violent chill running up the back of my neck. I picked it up, ran back to the truck and didn't try again. Since then, I keep it stored in a compartment, wrapped in a cloth. Always with me. I've heard several other truck drivers tell similar stories. Some didn't know her name, they just talked about a strange girl who disappeared along the way. Others say she appears in the passenger seat without even asking for a ride. But they all agree on one thing: she means no harm. She never talks about revenge, never hurt anyone. It's as if she's stuck there, repeating that route, looking for something, or someone, that she never finds. A sad presence, who asks for a ride just to remind me that she's still there. And I've carried that with me ever since that night. Every now and then, when the road is quiet and the night seems darker than usual, I feel that same scent invading the cabin. And it's always on the same stretch. I don't even get scared anymore. I just turn down the radio, keep quiet, and keep driving. A part of me even hopes she'll show up again. That she'll get in the truck like before, sit next to me, and ask, in that calm voice, to the gate. Maybe, deep down, that's all she needs. Someone who isn't afraid. Someone who'll take her to the end of the line. The last time I passed by there, I saw something different. The cemetery marker had fresh flowers hanging from it, and a brooch just like mine stuck between them. I don't know who left it. But that night, the place seemed less cold. As if, for some reason, she had been remembered by someone else. And if you ever pass by there, in the early hours of the morning, and see a figure in white asking for a ride, don't be afraid. She just wants to go home. It was just after midnight when I turned onto Route 491, leaving Gallup and heading for Shiprock. I had driven this stretch of road a few times before, but I was always bothered by the darkness of the road. It was an isolated stretch of road, with a desert landscape and almost no signs of life. But that night, the silence was even more intense than usual. I was listening to a random podcast on the radio when I noticed a pair of headlights approaching in my rearview mirror. I didn't pay much attention at first, but something caught my attention. The headlights were too low. Strangely low, as if they were almost glued to the asphalt. I looked again and frowned. The truck was coming fast, without signaling, and when it got closer, I noticed two things that gave me the creeps. Its headlights were on, but the rest of the vehicle was completely dark, as if it didn't reflect any light. And worse still, it had no license plates. I slowed down a bit to let it pass, thinking it was some crazy guy wanting to race in the desert. But it didn't pass. It stayed right behind me, its low beams illuminating the underside of my trailer. Its presence was uncomfortable. Tense. I started to feel a cold sweat running down my back. I tried to signal with the hazard lights, accelerate a little, change lanes. Nothing worked. It was still there, right behind me, getting closer and closer. At one point, when I looked in the rearview mirror, I noticed a detail that made my blood run cold. There was no one behind the wheel. The cabin was visible, dimly lit by its own headlights, but completely empty. No silhouette, no movement. It was as if the truck was moving by itself. At that moment, panic began to set in. The desperation of being followed by something that did not obey the rules of logic. I floored it, trying to outpace him, but it was as if every time I accelerated, he also increased his speed. There was no engine noise or tire squeal, it was as if he was gliding along the road. At one point, I saw a side entrance to the right that led to a dirt road. I turned sharply, thinking that would confuse my pursuer. For a moment, it seemed to work. The headlights disappeared. But when I realized where I was, I realized something was wrong. The asphalt was gone, and the road ahead led straight into a ravine. And worst of all, the silent truck was behind me again, closer than ever. I braked hard, the wheels screeched on the loose dirt and the truck skidded a few meters from the edge. I got out of the cab, almost stumbling, with my legs shaking, and ran a few steps back, trying to understand what was happening. The truck that was following me stopped right behind. No sound. No movement. Just stopped, with its low beams still on, pointing straight at me. The engine wasn't running, there was no heat in the air, there was nothing. It was like the shadow of a truck, a presence made of empty metal. And yet, I felt it, looking at me. As if it had a conscience. I stared, waiting for someone to come out, for some sound, anything. But nothing happened. After what seemed like an eternity, the headlights went out all at once. And when I blinked, the truck was no longer there. It had disappeared. Out of nowhere. No dust, no tire tracks. As if it had never existed. I walked back to my cabin slowly, still in shock, and it took me a good few minutes to get the engine started again. The radio was silent, the air was heavy, as if something had stayed there with me. And the worst part was that the road I took to the canyon didn't appear on the GPS. As if it didn't even exist. I drove back slowly, trying to retrace my steps. But no matter how hard I drove, I never found that side entrance again. Route 491 looked like a completely different road now. No markings, no sign that anything had followed me. I drove straight to a gas station in Shiprock, parked, went into the bathroom, and stared at my own reflection for a few minutes. My face was pale, my eyes wide. When I washed my face and looked up, I noticed something in the mirror that stopped me in my tracks. Behind me, for a second, the reflection showed headlights on. 2 pinpoints of light, low and unmoving. When I turned to look, there was nothing there. Since that day, I have never used that route in the early hours of the morning. And every time I see a truck approaching in my rearview mirror, my heart races. No matter the time, no matter the place, if the headlights are too low and too quiet, I change lanes, stop, let it pass. And yet, every now and then, I feel that same presence. As if it were still following me. As if, in fact, I had not managed to escape. Because the real fear was not the truck itself. It was the feeling that it knew where to find me. And that it was just waiting for the next turn. A few weeks later, I was talking to an older trucker at a gas station in Farmington. When I mentioned Route 491, he stopped fiddling with his coffee and looked at me with a serious expression. He asked if I had seen the driverless truck. I didn't have to answer. He nodded slowly and said that it appears from time to time, always on the same stretch of road. And always at night. He said that a buddy of his had driven his truck into a ravine years ago. They never found the body, just the cargo, intact. Since then, other drivers have sworn they've seen the same truck, with no license plates, no noise, just appearing out of nowhere and pushing people away. I went back there only once, during the day. I drove slowly, paying attention to each side entrance. But none of them led to any ravine. The road seemed different, as if it had been reconfigured. Only the oldest people in the area talk about it, and even then, with trepidation. They say there is a stretch there that does not belong to this world. That only appears to those who carry something they shouldn't: fear, guilt, pain. I don't know if I believe that. But I know what I saw. And I know that since then, something has been haunting me in the shadows. Not with sound, not with image. But with presence. Sometimes, when I stop to sleep on the side of the road, I wake up with the feeling that I'm being watched. When I look in the rearview mirror, I see the low beams on for a second, far away, on the road. They flash and disappear. I've never tried to follow them. I've never tried to find out where they're coming from. I just leave the engine running, as if that would protect me somehow. And I wait for the morning. The worst fear is not the one that shows itself. It's the one that waits for you to close your eyes again. The last time I saw the headlights, I was driving near Tucumcari. Early morning. Clear skies. No cars around. They appeared behind me, out of nowhere, as usual. But this time, I didn't try to run. I didn't try to get off the road. I just looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the emptiness in the cabin. And I saw them. The same truck, the same headlights, not a soul at the wheel. But there was something new. On the windshield, written in dust, I read a short sentence: "The next curve is yours." Since then, I haven't gone over 80 kilometers per hour. And I pray every night that I never cross paths with him again. It was almost dawn when I passed by Wakehurst Hospital, on the outskirts of Sydney. It was the end of a long trip, and I just wanted to get to the depot, drop off the cargo and go home. The road there is quiet at dawn, almost without traffic. The fog slowly descended over the asphalt, creating a scene typical of an old movie. That's when I saw her. A woman walking on the shoulder of the road, barefoot, in those thin hospital clothes, like a hospital gown, you know? She was hunched over, walking slowly, as if she were lost or weak. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was a patient who had run away or something. She looked young, but her face was too pale. Her hair was stuck to her face, as if it were wet, and her feet were dirty with dirt. When I got closer, I turned on my high beams to get a better look. She stopped walking and turned toward me. She didn't signal, she didn't ask for help, she just stared at me. It gave me the creeps right away. Her expression was strange, half confused, half sad, like she didn't even know where she was. Still, I pulled the truck over to the side of the road and got out carefully. I called out to her, took a few steps towards her, but the moment I got close, she disappeared. Literally. As if she had dissolved into thin air. I heard no sound, saw no movement. She just disappeared. I stood there, looking around, trying to understand. I thought I had imagined it, but when I turned to go back to the truck, I saw something on the ground, right where she was, a hospital bracelet. One of those white plastic ones with a name and date on it. I picked it up carefully. It was cold, wet. And the strangest thing, the date of death on the paper inside the bracelet was, from the previous day. I got back into the truck with my heart racing. I closed the door, started the engine and stood there, not daring to go on. I looked at the bracelet again, and the name seemed familiar. Claire D. I don't know why, but that made my throat tighten. I decided to drive to the next gas station and show it to someone. But on the way, I thought I saw the woman again. Only this time, in the reflection of the rearview mirror. Sitting in the back of the cab, with her head down. When I looked straight ahead, there was no one there. But the smell of ether and hospital lingered in the air for hours, even with the window open. At the gas station, I tried to act as if everything was normal. I ordered a coffee, sat at one of the tables, and stared at the bracelet. I thought about throwing it away, but something was stopping me. I had a strange feeling, as if it were important. As if, somehow, she wanted me to see it. I showed the bracelet to the cashier, an elderly gentleman. When he read the name, he became serious. He asked where I had found it. I told him briefly, trying not to sound crazy. He just shook his head and said, "This has happened before. You're not the first one to see this girl." I got back into the truck, feeling a bit dazed. I turned on the radio and tried to distract myself with anything, but the air inside the cabin was still heavy. At every turn, I looked in the rearview mirror, hoping to see that pale silhouette again. Sometimes, I felt a chill on the left side of my neck, as if someone was touching it. At one point, the radio hissed and tuned itself to a frequency I never used. The voice was feminine, low, like a whisper. I didn't understand what she was saying, but it sounded like a repeated phrase. I recorded it on my cell phone. When I listened to it later, I was able to decipher it. "I'm still here." I started to find out more about the woman. I talked to people in the area, some nurses, even a retired police officer who knew the hospital. I found out that years ago, a patient named Claire disappeared from the psychiatric ward. They never found her body. She had gone crazy after losing her husband in a car accident. She was hospitalized after being found wandering around the neighborhood. The date on the bracelet matched the date of her disappearance, but it was years ago. It didn't make sense. But then I understood, maybe it wasn't just any ghost. Maybe she had gotten stuck in that section, in that state, repeating her last steps before disappearing from the world. The next night, I gathered up my courage and went back to the place where I had first seen her. I stopped the truck at the same spot and got out with the bracelet in my hand. I stood there, waiting. The road was empty, the air was still. And then I smelled the ether again. The temperature dropped, and for a second, I saw her silhouette among the bushes, standing still, looking at me. I reached out my hand with the bracelet. The figure didn't move. It just slowly disappeared, as if it had dissolved into thin air. And at that moment, the wind blew hard for the first time in hours. Like a sigh of relief. I haven't seen her since. But I still keep the bracelet to this day. Because sometimes, all someone needs is to be seen. And remembered. After that, I never had any kind of direct manifestation again. But the memory of that night stayed with me. Sometimes, when I drive near hospitals or empty roads, the smell comes back. Quickly, like a sensory memory. It doesn't scare me anymore. It's almost like a warning that she's still there, but in peace. As if I had gotten what I needed. I still carry the bracelet in the glove compartment, wrapped in a tissue. I've never been able to throw it away. It's a reminder that not everything on this road has a simple explanation. I told the story to a few people. Most of them laughed, thought I was dreaming or that I was tired. But there was a friend who listened to me seriously and said, "The road sometimes holds what the world has forgotten." That has stuck with me ever since. The stretch near Wakehurst, that morning, seemed like a crack in time. A place where the end had never really come. where someone was still walking, trying to remember who they were, trying to get back to some place that no longer exists. Today, when I drive by, I slow down, turn off the radio, and just watch. I never see anyone walking on the shoulder again. But one time, as the sun was rising behind the trees, I swear I heard a soft voice say, "Thank you." It could have been in my head, or just the wind blowing through the mirrors. But it was clear. It was comforting. Maybe she had moved on. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally found her way back. If there's one thing I learned after that, it's that not every presence is a threat. Sometimes, it's just pain trying to be seen. And that there are lost stories out there, waiting for someone to listen. I listened. And I've never been the same again. It was one of those early mornings when the road seems heavier than usual. I was on my way to Melbourne from Adelaide and stopped at a side road to rest a bit. It wasn't a gas station or an official area, just a dirt road that I usually use when I'm really tired. It was about 3 in the morning, everything was dark, just the sounds of the night and the weak headlights illuminating part of the bush ahead. I closed my eyes for a while, with the engine still off and the radio mute, trying to fall asleep right there, in the back seat of the cabin. I woke up out of nowhere, without a sound, for no particular reason. I felt that dry shiver, as if someone had touched my back. When I looked in the rearview mirror of the cabin, I was so startled that I almost screamed. In the mirror, I could see an entire cemetery. Tombstones, crooked crosses, even a rusty iron fence in the background. It didn't make sense. I knew that stretch of road well and knew there wasn't a cemetery there. I slowly turned my body and looked out the back window. Nothing. Just the deserted road, a bit of fog and low grass. But in the mirror, the cemetery was still there. I rubbed my eyes, moved the mirror, turned my head again. The image remained. And it was clear. As if the mirror were showing another place. I remembered stories I had heard from old drivers about wrong reflections, but I had never taken them seriously. This, however, did not seem like a technical glitch. It seemed intentional. As if someone wanted me to see this. I began to sweat, my heart racing, the hairs on my arms standing on end. I tried to start the engine, but the key turned and nothing happened. No response. The cabin was strangely cold, and the air seemed still. I thought about going out and trying to walk to the main road, but as I put my hand on the doorknob, something appeared in the mirror. A figure. Standing between the tombstones. Tall, still, shrouded in some kind of dark veil, with no visible face. The image was clear, but when I looked back, there was still nothing. Only the mirror showed. And that thing, it seemed closer with each blink. I began to feel a buzzing in my ear, faint but constant, as if something was trying to get inside my head. It wasn't just a vision. It was a presence. And it knew I was seeing it. I couldn't leave the booth anymore. I stood there, motionless, staring at the mirror as if it were a living canvas. The figure didn't move, but it seemed closer and closer to the tombstones. Sometimes it would blink and she would take a step forward. No sound, no perceptible movement, she would just appear closer. Until, in one of those blinks, she was leaning against the iron fence that appeared in the reflection. I remembered what my grandfather used to say when I was little: if you see something that shouldn't be there, don't look at it. If you look at it, it will see you too. But it was too late. I had already looked at it. And she knew it. I tried to cover the mirror with my hand, but the reflection wouldn't go away. It was as if it had stuck to my vision, as if it had entered my mind. The whole truck felt stuffy, as if the air had become thicker, more humid. I began to smell a strange smell, of wet earth and wilted flowers, the the same smell I had smelled when I buried my mother years ago. It sent me into a spiral of memories, as if the mirror was pulling not only my attention, but my memory. I began to hear low whispers, coming from all directions, but I couldn't identify the words. They sounded like old, worn-out voices. The next time I looked in the mirror, the figure was less than 2 meters away from the reflected window. But it wasn't my window. It was as if it were about to pass through. As if the cemetery was somehow trying to align itself with reality. And the strangest thing, next to it, other figures began to appear. All still, all staring. Some with their faces covered, others with their heads lowered. The feeling of despair was total. My body froze, and for a moment, I swear I heard faint knocking coming from inside the mirror, as if someone, or something, was knocking on the other side of the glass. The last thing I remember was the temperature dropping completely. My breath turned to steam. And when I tried to start the engine one last time, it finally responded. The headlights came on, the radio hissed and then turned off, and the mirror went back to normal. It only reflected the cabin. Nothing else. There was no cemetery, no figures, nothing. I got out of there as fast as I could. I drove until dawn without stopping. When I got to a gas station and parked, I went to the bathroom and noticed something that chilled me to the bone. There were finger marks on my neck. As if someone had tried to pull me over while I was sleeping. But I know I wasn't sleeping. I saw it. I was there. And sometimes I think I still am. I went back to the same stretch of road a week later, during the day. I wanted to see if I could find any clues, any traces, anything that would explain what had happened. But there was nothing there. No sign of disturbed earth, no stones, much less a cemetery. Just asphalt, dry bushes, and a strange stillness, as if the place were waiting. I asked at a gas station about an old cemetery nearby, and the attendant just said, "There used to be one, decades ago. It was decommissioned and they say they moved the bodies, but not all of them." After that, he refused to continue the conversation. Ever since that morning, I've avoided mirrors inside the cabin. I covered the rearview mirror with electrical tape and kept a cloth over it. It may seem like an exaggeration, but since then, every time I forget and look too quickly, I swear I see crosses in the background of the reflection. As if that place were still reaching me through cracks. I've dreamed several times about the same tombstones, the same whispers. And I always wake up to the same smell of dead flowers, even when I'm far from the road, at home, with everything locked up. It seems like the experience didn't just stop there. I spoke to 2 fellow travelers and discreetly brought up the subject. One of them said he had felt something strange on that stretch of road, but had never seen anything. The other said he woke up once with the radio on by itself and the mirror shaking. No one believes it completely, but everyone knows that there are places that we simply don't discuss. And that spot near Melbourne became one of those. A kind of blind spot, where reality and what has already happened meet for a few seconds, just long enough for someone on the other side to peek back. These days, every time I go to sleep in the truck, I turn the mirror toward the ceiling or cover it with a flannel. I don't know if it helps. I don't know if I ever really left that reflection behind. But I do know one thing, not everything a mirror shows is what's behind you. Sometimes it shows you what it's waiting for. And if you stare at it too long, it stares back. It was one of those muggy, silent mornings on the Riverina Highway in New South Wales. I stopped the truck for a quick inspection. I always do this when I'm alone on the road, just to make sure everything's in order. The clock read 2:38 a.m., no cars had passed by for at least an hour, and the place was completely dark, except for my flashlight and the low beam in the cab. As I was checking the tires and the cargo straps, I heard something that made me freeze, a laugh. A child's laugh. Loud, clear, as if it were very close to me. At the time I thought it was my head playing tricks on me. Maybe it was fatigue. But then another laugh came, this time closer. And then another, as if 2 or 3 children were laughing together, hiding. I felt a shiver run through my entire body. The flashlight trembled in my hand, and I started to turn it around. I saw nothing. Just bushes, a road, and a darkness that seemed denser than before. The laughter suddenly stopped. Everything went silent again. I went to the other side of the truck and there they were, footprints. Small ones. Around the wheels, in the dry earth. Children's footprints, as if they had walked in a circle around the vehicle. I looked around again, completely goosebumps, my heart racing. No explanation made sense. The road was straight and open, and it was impossible for anyone to hide nearby without being seen. And yet, those marks were there. I took my cell phone to take a picture, but the camera wouldn't focus properly, as if something was stopping it. I took the picture anyway, but when I looked at it later, all that was left was the smooth ground. No marks at all. The footprints had disappeared from the image. But I saw them. I was there. I hadn't imagined it. I got back into the truck and locked everything. I started the engine and left as fast as I could, without looking back. In the following days, I tried to forget. I told the story to a friend on the road. He laughed and said it was just sleep delirium. I started to doubt myself too. Until, 3 days later, I went to unload the cargo at a warehouse in Wagga Wagga. When the employee opened the trunk, he stopped for a second, looked at me with a strange expression and asked, "You have small children, right?" I shook my head, not understanding. He pointed to the inside of the door. And there it was, a handprint. Small, very small. Like a child's handprint of about 4 years old. Dirty, marked in the dust of the cargo, with fingers stretched out as if someone had pressed inside. I stared at that mark for a few seconds, not knowing what to say. It was impossible for someone to have gotten in there. I had sealed the cargo myself, and the seal was intact. There was no way. That didn't make sense. I ran my finger over the mark. The dust had lifted, proving that it was recent. It wasn't something old. And the strangest thing, around the hand, there were thin lines, as if small nails had lightly scratched the surface of the internal panel. The employee looked embarrassed and walked away, perhaps sensing that something wasn't right there. I just closed the trunk and signed for the delivery in silence. That night, when I went to sleep in the trucking company's parking lot, I dreamed of the laughter again. It came from far away, but became clearer and clearer, until I woke up sweating, with the feeling that someone had touched the door handle of the cab. It started to happen again. At each night stop, I had a strange sensation, as if someone small was prowling around the truck. Once, I swear I saw a shadow running between the mirrors, very quickly, like a child hiding. But when I opened the door and went out with the flashlight, there was nothing. Just the muffled sound of the night. I decided to go back to the exact spot where it all started. Same time, same place. Just to see. I stopped the truck, turned off the engine and waited. The silence was almost solid, heavy. After about 20 minutes, the laughter returned. Weaker, as if it were coming from beneath the ground. I walked to the back of the truck with my heart pounding. In the dirt, more footprints. Small ones, and now, accompanied by a word written with my finger in the dust on the bumper. "Are you kidding?" My whole body froze. I ran back to the cabin and started the car without looking back. Since then, the handprint has disappeared, but the laughter returns from time to time. Always on deserted stretches of road, always during the early hours of the morning. I've tried to ignore it, but now I know it's no use. Something came with me that night. Something that doesn't want to scare me, it wants attention. And the more I try to ignore it, the more it tries to get me. One time, I left an old toy, a plastic car, inside the cabin. The other day, it was turned over, with the wheels dirty with dirt. That's all. But it was enough to convince me that, whatever it is, it's still around. Waiting for the right time to play again. I've thought about seeking help, some kind of explanation. But who would believe that? A truck driver saying he hears children laughing in the middle of the night, that he sees footprints where there shouldn't be anyone? The truth is that there are things that the road holds, and not everything that passes by us is from this time, or from this world. There are nights when I wake up with the impression that someone has lightly run their hand over my face, like a child trying to wake up their father. I don't feel anger, or threat. Just a constant, insistent presence. A loneliness trying not to be forgotten. The other day, a fellow traveler told me that she had also heard laughter on the same stretch. I didn't say anything at the time, I just listened. She described the sound as playful, but out of place. I got goosebumps all over. I showed her the photo of the word brinca that I had taken before deleting it. She was silent, then just said, "Whatever it is, it doesn't want to go away." This confirmed what I already suspected, it's not just me. Maybe that road held something that couldn't leave. Or someone. And now, it's looking for company in the only thing that still passes by, us. The handprint, the word in the dust, the dirty wheels of the cart, all of it adds up to a kind of pattern, an attempt at communication. I've never tried to respond. I'm afraid it will create a stronger bond, something I can't undo. But I also know that, somehow, there's already a connection. And that if the laughter ever stops for good, maybe I'll miss it. Maybe I'll realize that, deep down, something there just doesn't want to be forgotten. Today, every time I pass the stretch of Riverina Highway where it all began, I turn off the radio and watch the surroundings in silence. I have never seen the child. I have only heard her. I have only felt her. But I am certain she is there. And when the road is quiet enough, she will come back. To play. To remind us that she exists. And that once, someone heard her laughter. And stopped.